Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. I am your host, Hector Kolonas, and I'm joined once again by the formidable Mike LaRosa. Mike, how are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm even better now that I'm back. It's been a little while.
It is. We missed you here on the pod, and it's great to have you back. We have an action-packed episode this week. We're going to talk about the changing form of spaces. You've missed some of the conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks about what is a clubhouse, what is a co-working space, all of that. We're going to dig into that, and we're going to dig into how LinkedIn is dealing with one of their data issues around workspaces. We're also going to dig into whether co-working works in specific types of buildings. And then we're going to look at a TEDx talk from one of the most inspiring leaders in co-working. But before we do any of that, this week's podcast, game, newsletter, everything is sponsored by Syncaroo. Full disclosure, I am a co-founder at Syncaroo, so I am absolutely delighted that we get to support the newsletter so that we can make all of this information available for free. This week in the newsletter, we actually put out a thank you as opposed to a sponsorship. We're not selling anything this week. We're just saying thank you to all the operators who worked with us last year all around the world. We try to figure what is the common thread across all the teams we work with, all the people we worked with. And what we found is whether they were doing CRM integrations or automating aggregators or just improving their data strategy, the one thing that all of them came into the conversation to do was to improve the workday for their peers. And we just wanted to celebrate that because no one came to us and they're like, yeah, we want to make, obviously operators want to make more money, but all the people on the ground, they wanted a better workday for their peers and they wanted to do less busy work. So that's all Syncaroo put into the newsletter this week. Go and check out that thank you notes and kind of see some of our customers and partners. But on that note, Mike, should we dive into this week's newsletter?
Yeah, I can't wait.
Cool. So there was a few pieces in the news and views section about different types of co-working and whether things fall underneath co-working or co-working falls in another category is a debate for another conference stage and panel. But what we do see is there's a kind of growth or popularity of the clubhouse type model or the work club model. We saw a couple of links this week. We shared a couple of links this week. One from Mark Feldman, who was exploring how switchyards solved the experience gap and kind of made him fall back in love with co-working. We saw a piece from Kat Johnson, who was on the podcast last week, I believe, discussing what this symbolism of the work club as real co-working means for everyone else who's in co-working and people who are not in co-working, who call themselves co-working. But Mike, you've been out for a little bit. What say you about this whole conversation about the neighborhood work club?
Yeah, I think it's exciting to see the evolution of how people are turning to different solutions based on their lived experience. And so 6 years in after a major lockdown, we're, I think, finally seeing what normal, quote unquote, back to office, quote unquote, hybrid truly is. I would encourage anyone out there to try to open up your perspective or open up your mind this year on your thoughts and your feelings on the phrase, what is co-working? And I think that as someone who recently has been stepping out of the co-working world and is talking to other types of industries, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of desire, and there's a lot of need for all sorts of flexible workspaces. And so if you feel really strongly enough that you need to lean into one specific label or type versus another, like that's your choice. But as a business operator of space or a facilitator of community, it's okay to have different types of spaces for different types of purposes. I think the biggest signal for this was the Industrious move and them opening up this new indie brand and trying to designate and communicate to the end user to expect differences so that way you're managing their expectations, so that way they're not expecting a typical maybe Waffle Wednesday that they would get at a full-blown Industrious, but maybe it's something a little bit more self-service. We're seeing this across the board as it relates to business travel type needs. Lounges are developing like a grab and go concept at the airports, but it's just that the food is in a package for you to take rather on a buffet. And hotels, there's limited service hotels versus five-star Ritz-Carlton Four Seasons experiences. So I would say don't get trapped, don't get caught in this conversation of what is or is not co-working. Know what you provide and know what service you provide, and you'll attract the people that are looking for what you're offering. And I just think it's funny that there's a quote unquote resurgence of co-working, but for anyone out there that knows anything, we can tell you that the co-working never went anywhere. A major brand might have gone through a revitalization or a reorganization, but that's not reflective of the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I do think on that note of what is co-working, I've been thinking about this for a while now. I think it's more of thinking of all the different types as this ecosystem of work. Like the day where you went to one office is long gone. Everyone's going to have these different types of spaces. Mark was saying how there's privacy, he's got low profile, it's very simple over luxury. But if you're meeting a client, you probably want to go to a different type of space. If you want to do different types of work, you want to go to different types of spaces. If you have different things outside of work, where can you go to that fits into this new way of working as opposed to where you work? If we want to look at what co-working's big impact is unblocking or unlocking this ability to work from third, fourth, fifth spaces that all come together and create a more productive workday for you that allows you to fit all the other parts of your life in and around it. And there was another link actually this week's newsletter from Xavier, who shares how he went to a co-working space or a coffee shop and felt instantly less productive because he had gotten so used to talking to his AI agents at home that when he suddenly got somewhere where the expectation was to be quiet or not to speak out loud, he felt unproductive. And the reason why I put in the newsletter is we could see this as, people are going to start wanting little kind of studio or pods that they can just sit in all day and speak to their AIs and not worry about people overhearing or feel that they're upsetting people. Or we could see this as an opportunity to create types of spaces or areas in your space to accommodate this idea where people will speak to their computers or interact with voice agents as opposed to just type into a screen. And that may change the types of spaces that exist. Not every co-working is going to become like that, and we're all not going to go back to fish bowls, but it's just an interesting way to see, as we change how we work, will that change the places in which we work?
Yep. And people still ask me what my favorite co-working space is. People still ask me what I love about co-working, or will ask me if that is a co-working space. And I think I've come to the conclusion that it's the vibe, right? So I was just at a conference with some business partners of mine, and we were at one of the rounds. We were in a massive convention center hall. There's 2,200 people, but we were sitting at a round, and it was us and another group, and we were co-working. We were answering emails. We were having a conversation. I learned something new about stacking like a luxury travel rewards on top of a car. Like, I think that you can make co-working wherever you are. And it's the vibe that you provide. But that's also why I love the Switch Yard's success, because they really are proving that you don't need to have 60,000 square feet of glass boxes, that people will pay $350, $450 a month for somewhere to go. I've also seen them pop up a lot more on social media. People are using them as in-between spaces. There's a young father of, I think, 3, whose wife is a stay-at-home parent, but he's got a longer commute. And so he breaks it up. He wakes up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. He drives into a Switch Yards, gets his coffee, gets his quiet time, and then he goes into his actual company's provided, right? And so I think that's a great example as to, we have to really release ourselves from what is the firm definition and just accept that, like, it's a vibe, man.
Yeah. I love that. We definitely dove into like the whole, how important are vibes in co-working, with Danielle Farage on a recent podcast. Go listen to that, all about how Gen Z thinks about co-working, because that's what it is. They're not looking for desks, they're not looking for connectivity. What they're looking for is vibes that help them get their work done. So completely agree with you on that.
From work vibes to snooze vibes. I know there was a really cool article also from our buddy Taji about nap boxes. And once again, not entirely a new concept, right? We've always seen those cool cocoon nap pods in the Google offices. And then we've also seen those little capsule hotels, right? But, someone gets $100 million and now it's a thing. So I think it just speaks to the need to have different types of amenities based on the location of the building. And I know that the general topic is still kind of all these different definitions of co-working or what is or is not. There's also a really great article that you included that was written about, how to know if co-working will work in a building. And I would advocate to say that it's not a if, it's a what type of co-working will work in that building. So maybe it's heavier on meeting rooms and it's more amenity spaces for existing tenants. Maybe it is heavier on more of the old school fishbowl because you've got in some markets in India, they're incredibly popular right now because that type of workforce, that's what they're looking for and that's what they need. So I would always advocate it's not just will it work, but what type will work, because activating space will always pay off, but it's dependent on what your goals are, what your objectives are, and then also what the resources are behind you.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And it's a really good way to frame it, given that there are these wide varieties of SKUs, product types, product mixes that you can add. As you also mentioned at the top of the call, there are a lot of brands who are now doing multi-brand strategies, right? You don't have to put your key brand or your key flag into a specific building if you have multiple brands, you have multiple offerings, multiple types. There's different ways to implement the kinds of spaces that people want to use. I think it comes down to activating space. You're completely right there. It doesn't have to always look exactly the same. And that's the beauty of everything we all do. That co-working doesn't look the same in every space. Even in two of the same brands, it doesn't look the same.
And take a look at what I think another signal that can tell you kind of where the general public's head is at. Take a look at what Starbucks is doing. Before COVID is when it started, but COVID really accelerated their decision to be more focused on mobile order, less seating options, less comfortable seating. They're now going back to the good old 90s design. We've got the comfy chairs coming back. We've got the warmer tones, softer surfaces, because people want a place to hang out and feel comfortable. I always would say that when it comes to co-working, I always look for a place that I am fine walking away from my laptop to use the restroom. No one should have to have an anxiety attack to use the restroom. And so I think that that's why some coffee shops might not be the right fit, but some coffee shops might be the perfect vibe. Yep. Slower, smaller, independently owned. You're not worried about someone running off with your backpack. So it's the vibe.
Yeah, I mean, it also sits very closely to another trend that we're following, and that's the banks shifting into both co-working and cafes and trying to amalgamate that together instead of having retail space. Santander a couple of weeks ago broke another record, entered a new market, hundreds of locations all around the world, including here in New York. Is it what everyone wants? No. But will it work in some places and not others? Yes. So there is this whole different shift, and it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of years to see the amalgamation form new products, whether it is a nap pod and a co-working space and a podcast studio, and that is all there is compared to a fully baked co-working community focused space.
And I think the fact that banks are getting into it is a really positive sign for the industry, because the people that own the most amount of buildings are the banks. And a lot of banks these days are taking back those buildings from people that are defaulting. And so the fact that they are investigating these types of models for their own business purposes, but also monetizing the space that they themselves are sitting on, I think it bodes really well. And I think we need to remind ourselves that it's easy to get frustrated and it's easy to get impatient, but we're still so early on. If you take a look at the scheme of things and how much work has evolved since the Industrial Revolution, we barely had a blip of the suburban rat race type of work period. A couple decades is not a lot in the scheme of
Hmm.
things. So I think we sometimes get lost in the fact
Yes.
that this is still so new. To
Yeah.
stay excited by the fact that we are trying new things, pivoting is allowed, and that if you see where we've come from as an industry from when you and I first met, Hector, in 2015,
Hmm.
right? So much has changed, but also so much has still stayed the same.
Yep.
And how many people have we seen grow? And I think this speaks to the TEDx talk you wanted to highlight, from OS offices down in Mexico, is that you can see that it's okay to go slower. You don't need to be the venture backed darling. You don't need to be the unicorn valuation, but that if you know your business and you know your operations, you can scale successfully without having to, get those golden handcuffs, because funding's great until the investors start calling the shots.
Yep. Very, very true. And I definitely recommend if anyone is listening in and they're like, what TEDx talk are you talking about? Go check the newsletter out. Go look at Javier from iOS Office's TEDx talk, all about growing sustainably without venture capital. It's a great listen for anyone in this industry who is wondering, can you scale? Can you compete with the large operators? Definitely go have a listen to that. And the other conversations that we shared this week, a lot of really interesting discussions in there. Go and definitely check that out. I want to take it back sort of to tech before we kind of sign out for today. It's always interesting that we discuss what's happening in tech within our industry, but forget that other people also have workspace and also have commercial real estate departments. So when I saw this post from the head of workplace data and analytics at LinkedIn, it caught my attention. The main point of the whole post that she made was how they came up with a solution, but this core problem that everyone in CRE or in workplace has a data problem. And it's not that there isn't data, it's that the data there's too much of it and it's spread across so many spreadsheets, tools, vendor systems, and it takes too long to go from extracting it to being able to make a decision. And this is not new. If anyone's ever heard me speak on stage or looked at what Syncaroo does, this is preaching to the choir to me, but it's fantastic to see their approach, right? They built a data lake. They then built their own AI agent called Tara that sits above that. And now they can speak to their data throughout the decision-making process as opposed to having to go and pull reports. And this is one thing that we're seeing a lot of the most forward-looking operators really do. When I mentioned at the top of this call that operators are starting to think more seriously about their data strategy, this is it. This is a glowing example of why, if you have multiple locations with multiple customers and a multitude of systems, you have to start thinking about not only how do you create dashboards and reports, but what is your long-term approach to knowing that you're going to get X times more, X to the power of N times more data to start making decisions with, and have even less people who can adequately kind of move through that really, really quickly. Just a really good piece. I geeked out a lot, but I'm going to kick it back to you, Mike. What spoke to you from this piece?
Well, I can share firsthand experiences of speaking with workspace leaders in enterprise organizations that were always aware of the data that they had access to, but they weren't successfully utilizing that data. With AI advances, and we're seeing some platforms try to build out this functionality as well, um, I think that it's overall positive. I'm cautious as to how smooth of a process this can be, or how fast this will go. Maybe this is going to be another slog. There is such a large machine at play as it relates to how many people monetize the use of real estate or the access or the sales of real estate, that the headwinds are kind of so heavy. I'm not surprised that LinkedIn opted to do it themselves. because unfortunately the world that we live in these services firms, everything's fragmented. We hear these horror stories of like, the $100 million lawsuits against Deloitte trying to implement force on from a legacy SAP system. That's no different than the conversations that these people are having with legacy real estate data. I think it will be very interesting. I think there's a lot more kind of merger and acquisition activity that it will have to happen as these tools kind of become more effective and efficient. And unfortunately, I think there's also people in this industry need to be aware that this is now a category or a sector of the industry that's incredibly susceptible to AI job replacement. And so there's a lot of folks that have built careers designing and studying the real estate usage of the companies that they work for, and that those roles just will no longer be needed. So you have to think forward as to how does the AI power the job that you want to have, and how can you position yourself to be the one that's maybe prompting, because AI can find things and it's getting smarter and smarter every day, but humans still have that perhaps historical organizational knowledge. That's the only kind of advantage there. So if you can position yourself understanding how to prompt for what you're looking for, that really is, I think, the best path forward.
Yeah, it is a really interesting one. And it's a conversation I have with many execs is they've got great people. They have this contextual knowledge. That's an operational risk, but it's also operational benefit, right? It's a resource that you don't want to put into a system. You want to retain those people. You want to retain that insight. It could be an arms race, right? At the end of the day, the one who has the squeakiest, cleanest, best data is going to be able to do things that no one else can do for years. And it's just a really interesting conundrum, going back to the platforms and the siloification of all the data and the fact that you can't get things to move and speak to each other. We're starting to see walls go up, right? We're starting to see platforms, not only in our industry, but also outside. I think it was Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan Chase who was starting to charge for access to their API, charge platforms for building on their ecosystem. This is trends we're going to start seeing as well, as platforms are going to start closing up. There are platforms in our industry that still don't have API access, right? And operators are having to navigate that conversation from a place of not only what they need today, but what they're going to need 2 years from now if they're signing a 10-year contract or a 5-year contract. And it's a lot of these conversations that are happening. I expect to hear and see more of these conversations at events coming up. I expect to hear about it more in the corridors. I expect to hear it more in kind of thought pieces that we share. I don't think the full implication of data ownership has hit home yet. And it's going to be probably one of the biggest trends at the end of this year.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to stop us here, let everyone get back to their week. Mike, thanks again for jumping back in with us. Great to have you back here. We'll definitely get you back in here as often as we can. I know that you're a busy guy right now.
Yes, it's commuting to Vegas. It was not on my 2025, 2026 bingo card, but I am loving it at my home away from home. And there's some exciting news that I think will bring me to the podcast a little bit more frequently. So thanks for having me, Hector. I appreciate it. That's what in the industry we call a tease.
Love that. All right, Mike, we'll have you back. We've got some great podcasts dropping, some behind the scenes from Switchyards, which I believe is an exclusive. That's going to be dropping into your podcast feed soon. We've got some M&A news coming out. We have behind the scenes of one of the biggest OGs who stepped out of the industry. Wherever you're watching or listening to this, hit that subscribe button and look out for the future episodes.
See ya.
Take care.